Hey guys, this is Matt from McWattersaffect, and I'm going to be talking about an article I found in the Washington Examiner. But first, I need you to hit like and subscribe. Helps the channel grow. Alright, the beginning of the article, the opening headline, House Republicans seek to boost case for voter ID laws. Alright guys, I'm one of these people that's actually for voter ID laws. And I especially like the idea of you showing your ID when you go to vote. In the state I live in, you have a voter registration, which is fine with me as well, because for you to be able to get it, you got to go to the DMV, and they see your ID whenever they ask you if you want to have the voter registration card, if you're interested in voting. And so they see your ID, they also see your registration, social security card, stuff like that. So I have no problem with a voter ID like that, like a voter registration card. That's a good way to do it too. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of this article. 3 House Republicans are pulling together information about how many states rely on versions of voter ID laws in their voting process as GOP lawmakers across the country push for stricter voter integrity measures. Rep. Virginia Fox, James Comer, and Ronnie Davis sent a letter Friday to the National Conference of State Legislators and Association representing state lawmakers asking for a full list of which states use voter ID laws, as well as which ones have voter ID proposals pending. The debate over asking voters to provide their ID in order to cast a ballot heated up earlier this year when Georgia passed a voting law that extended ID requirements to mail-in voting. I'm one of these people, if you have to show your ID to go vote whenever you go to the poll, I think you should have to show it whenever you get a mail-in ballot. Now, there's certain people that I think should be exempt from that. People like, if you're in the military, obviously, they fought for our country, so they don't have to show an ID. Not only that, they're already put it in the system anyway. We'll go ahead and look at the rest of the article. The law demands voters provide a driver's license or social security number in order to request a absentee ballot, a requirement to which Democrats object strenuously. Alright, I don't know why they object to this, especially since it don't have to be a photo ID. You can actually give a social security number. For you to be able to get on a plane, you have to have an ID. For you to be able to buy alcohol, you have to have a photo ID. For you to be able to buy cigarettes, you have to have a photo ID. For you to get, let's say, healthcare, government healthcare, you have to have a photo ID and your social security number. For you to be able to get food stamps, you have to have either a photo ID and your social security number, or a social security number and a bill showing your address. Okay, there's a list of stuff you have to show for everything you have to do in this country to get from the government. You also have to show an ID to buy certain products. It's like guns, you gotta have a photo ID. Alcohol, you gotta have a photo ID. Cigarettes, you gotta have a photo ID. If you're in certain states that are selling marijuana, you have to have a photo ID. And us not having the same restrictions or the same policies when it comes to voting, it doesn't even make sense. Alright guys, let's go ahead and keep on reading. But after the failure of a major voting rights bill in Congress, some Democrats have embraced the idea of including a voting ID requirement in compromise legislation. First thing, that bill, H.R. 1, or For the People's Act, it should be called For the Democrats Act. This thing was so one-sided, it went for the Democrats extremely, especially since it's based off pretty much the kind of laws they have in California when it comes to voting. And obviously, you're not going to see a Republican in the White House for another 56 years if you pass this thing. Probably won't see the Republicans ever run the Senate and the House for a long time as well, if that was passed. And it's because what happened in the 2020 election would be 100% legal in all elections after that, if that bill is passed. Alright, let's keep on reading. The House Republicans noted the shift in their letter to seek to build a list of where the requirements are in place. There's an increasing bipartisan support for requirements to show a photo identification before being permitted to cast a ballot. They wrote, even Democrats who once opposed such measures are now signaling support, including former President Barack Obama and voter rights advocate Stacey Abrams. The reason they're showing support for voter ID is because they saw the poll where 80% of Americans are for it. Republicans are in the 90 percentile. The independents are in between 70 and 80%, and the Democrats are in between 60 to 70%. So even Democrats are for voter ID. States that ask voters to prove their identity apply the requirement with varying levels of strictness according to the National Conference of State Legislators. Now, a perfect example of that is in Georgia, where you have to show a driver's license when you go to vote in person. Now, in West Virginia, you have to show a voter registration card. Now, you get that when you go to DMV, or you can get it online at the DMV, and they have your ID, your photo ID, and they also have your social security number. So it's pretty much the same thing, really. Some states require a photo ID to cast a ballot, while others allow alternative forms of documentation, such as utility bills, to suffice. Now, in the state of West Virginia, where I live at, you can use a utility bill, but you have to add something else with it if you don't have a photo ID, like a social security card or your birth certificate, for you to actually get a voter registration card. You got to show 2 or 3 different kinds of forms of ID. State-level voting reform returned to the spotlight earlier this month when Texas Democrats fled to the Lone Star State to deny the legislature a quorum in order to block voting reform legislation. And when they left Texas, they broke a lot of CDC rules when they went through the airport without a mask and also got on a plane without a mask. Everybody else has to do it, but they didn't. But I digress. Let's go ahead and keep on reading. The legislation would impose ID requirements on voters requesting an absentee ballot, like Georgia law does. If a Texas voter does not have a driver's license or social security number, they can sign an affidavit swearing they have no other identification and still receive their absentee ballot. All right, what's the problem here? All right, guys, in my opinion, if you don't have a driver's license or a social security number, you probably shouldn't be voting. More likely, you're an immigrant. Whether you have a green card or if you're here illegally, it doesn't matter. You're not supposed to be voting because you're not a United States citizen. So, for you to be able to vote, you got to go and get your citizenship. This actually makes it where you don't have to show it. Honestly, you don't have to show it, either one. Because it says all you have to do is fill out an affidavit, and you'd actually get the right to vote on an absentee ballot. Now, guys, looking at that, I think that law, I can't believe Democrats think that thing is strict. It's not strict. It's not strict enough, in my opinion. All right, guys, that's the end of the article. And I think the Democrats are just stalling for time until they can figure out how to get around the filibuster so they can pass H.R. 1. They're not going to add a photo ID law to that. They're not going to add anything to it. They want to keep it the way it is because it's similar to the laws that they have in California. And Democrats, they pretty much run California. And they want to do that to the whole United States. And pretty much what you saw in 2020, they want to make that legal across the country. And make sure the federal government runs our elections. Well, really, if you look at the Constitution, the states are supposed to run the elections. The states are the ones that created the federal government, not vice versa. But guys, that's my opinion. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit like and subscribe. Helps the channel grow. Peace.